Yo, check this out. This is Wayne Wonder, representing for Warwick Hill TV. You see the vision, don't it? See the vision. Warwick Hill TV. Keep it locked.
Now, I'm gonna tell you. We, us as bloggers, these are the issues that we need to address. You understand what I said? You see? Set the path for the youth. Share, like, and subscribe and stay tuned to the channel. I don't know all this. Yes, I. Greetings once again in the mighty name of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie I. And I think that's good and wonderful amongst us. You see, I am now continue to read one of the least popular subject I am ever bring class for the channel. See, but it's because I'm saying Black Mystery Month, and I still read it because what I try to do is resurrect some level of self-confidence and self-esteem in the black people, because I recognize that has been destroyed through the process of enslavement and things like that. You get what I'm saying? And Jim Crow and all of them things. So, and I try, based on I level of skill and ability to read. I know some whole heap of youth out there cannot read and appreciate, love the effort that I make. Seeing so, no just bear with I, see, because like these are the main tenets of the channel. It's not about mix up on people business and them things there. If you notice, we always try create something positive even out of the mix up. You see, so we'll continue really reading, and you don't know who don't like it, I just say it go. So we give thanks to you. You see? Alright. In 1984, at the Nile Valley Conference in Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Charles Coffer, professor of Old Testament at the International Theological Center in Atlanta, discussed the role of Egypt and Ethiopia in the Old Testament. He stated the following: in the King James and Revised Standard Version of the Bible, the word Egypt, Mizraim in Hebrew, along with cognates, occur some 740 times in the Old Testament. The word translated Ethiopia and or Cush in Hebrew, along with cognates and including 3 instances of duplications in the references, appears 58 times in the King James Version. In this version, the translation Ethiopia is also 39 times. Cush untranslated with cognates 19 times. The numerous references to Egypt led an Old Testament scholar to remark, no other land is mentioned so frequently as Egypt in the Old Testament. To understand Israel, one must look well into Egypt. See? The story of Azar, Aset, and Heru is the first story in the recorded history of man of a holy royal family. The Trinity, Immaculate Conception, Virgin Birth, and Resurrection. Evidence of this Trinity is known to have existed in ancient Nubia as late as 3300 BC, carved on the walls of the Temple of Luxor circa 1380 BC are scenes which depicted the following: 1. The Annunciation. The nature duty is shown announcing to the Virgin Aset that the coming birth of their son, Heru. 2. The Immaculate Conception. The nature Nep, who represent the Holy Ghost, and the nature Het, Heru, Hathor, are shown symbolically impregnating Aset by holding ankhs, symbols of life, to the nostrils of the Virgin Mother to be. 3. The Virgin Birth. Aset is shown sitting on the birthing stool, and the newborn child is attended by midwives. 4. The Adoration. The newborn Heru is portrayed receiving gifts from 3 kings or Magi, while being adored by a host of gods and men. Samuel Sharp, author of Egyptian Mystery and Egyptian Christianity, made the following comments about viewing this scene. In this picture, we have the Annunciation, the Conception, the birth, and the adoration as described in the first and second chapters of Luke's Gospel. And as we have historical assurance that the chapters in Matthew's Gospel, which contains the miraculous birth of Christ, are often additions, not in the earliest manuscripts, it seems probable that these two poetical chapters in Luke may also be unhistorically and borrowed from the Egyptian accounts of the miraculous birth of their kings. Gerald Macy reproduced these images in his book Ancient Egypt, The Light of the World, Volume 11, which was published in 1907. In this work, Macy cited more than 200 similarities between the lives of Arthur and Hero and the life of Jesus the Christ, who was born at least 3,300 years later. Comparisons between the life of Hero and Jesus Christ. Horus had two mothers, Isis the Virgin, who conceived him, and Nephthys, who nursed him. He was brought forth singly as one of 5 brothers. Horus was with his mother, the Virgin, until 12 years old, when he was transformed into the beloved Son of God as the only begotten of the Father in heaven. From 12 to 30 years of age, there is no record in the life of Horus. Horus, at 30 years of age, became adult in his baptism by Anno. Horus, in his baptism, made his transformation into the beloved Son and only begotten of the Father, the Holy Spirit, represented by a bird. Jesus now. Jesus had 2 mothers, Mary the Virgin, who conceived him, and Mary the wife of Cleophas, who brought him forth as one of her 5 children. Jesus remained with his mother, the Virgin, up to the age of 12 years, when he left her to be about his Father's business. From 12 to 30 years of age, there is no record in the life of Jesus. Jesus at 30 years of age was made a man in his baptism by John the Baptist. Jesus in his baptism is hailed from heaven as the beloved Son and the only begotten of the Father, God, the Holy Spirit, represented by a dove. See? So, we see the similarities between thousands of years apart. Yeah, we'll continue. See? You know what we're dealing. Jocelyn Rees, author of Shocking Creeds, The Virgin Birth Doctrine, has thoroughly researched the history of virgin birth stories and discussed their African origin. Horus was said to be the parthenogenesis child of the Virgin Mother, Isis. In the catacombs of Rome, black statues of this Egyptian divine mother and infant still survive from the early Christian worship of the Virgin and Child, to which they were converted. In these, the Virgin Mary is represented as a black negress and often with the face veiled in the true Isis fashion. Statues of the goddess Isis with the child Horus in her arms were common in Egypt and were exported to all neighboring and to many remote countries where they are still to be found with new names attached to them. Christians in Europe, Buddhists in Turkestan, Taoists in China and Japan. As an adult, Heru became a symbol for good, overcoming evil after he avenges the death of his father by slaying his wicked uncle Set. Cosmologically, Satan represents the setting sun, sunset, which brings on darkness, evil, fear, and ignorance. Set also represents the destructive force of nature. Heru personifies the force of life, and his symbol, the rising sun, banishes the night and overpowers the forces of evil. In the final analysis, Heru becomes in life what its father Azar is in death. Prototypes for the living and the dead, respectively. As other prototypes for the living and the dead, respectively, as other cultures infuse elements of Nile Valley symbolism, philosophy, and religion into their society, names were changed and symbols were modified, but not all of the original African components were lost. One has only to develop a finely tuned eye to rediscover the remnants of Nile Valley civilization, which can be found in the symbolisms and religions of today. The architectural masterpieces of Kemet. Architecture is one of the most powerful expressions of human creativity. Incorporated within it are elements relating to art, the physical science, psychology, and religion. Architectural structures serve numerous functions. They provide shelter and serve as gathering places where people work, play, pray, and are entertained. Thousands of years after the architects are dead and forgotten, the structures they create live on and tell the story of their entire civilization. The philosophy of a nation is often reflected in its architecture. Nowhere is their statement more accurate than with respect to ancient Kemet. Before the Medu nature hieroglyphics were deciphered, and hundreds of years before the complexities of the science, religion, and philosophy of Kemet were known, her ancient temples, pyramids, and tombs command the respect and admiration of millions of awestruck visitors. Numerous questions have been asked as to why and how these monuments were built. Many of these questions remain unanswered to this very day. Not only does the architecture of Kemet reflect the value and philosophies of its people, it also has incorporated within its physical structure aspects of ancient knowledge which can easily be interpreted, and other elements which defy analysis. The architecture of Kemet is exoteric, and its powerful image overwhelms the senses. This same architecture transmits a subliminal message into the consciousness of any individual who is spiritually and mentally prepared to receive it. Upon examining the architecture of Kemet, it becomes obvious that tremendous energy was expended during the planning, design, and construction of these ancient structures. Buildings were not arbitrarily located on just any site, and they could not have been built without teams of skilled craftsmen and professionals. The notion that many of these structures were built by slave labor is not only unfounded but totally unrealistic. The same organizational skills necessary to build the Sears Tower in Chicago or the World Trade Center in New York were also required to build the ancient monuments in the Nile Valley. In archaeology, whenever a temple or ancient monument is aligned to a specific rising or setting position of the sun, moon, or other heavenly body, that site is usually referred to as an observatory or a solar or lunar structure. From this perspective, practically every pyramid and temple in the Nile Valley serves some astronomical purpose. These ancient buildings were designed not only to accommodate the physical need of the people, they were also astronomically oriented to facilitate their spiritual needs as well. Temples were designed to create a sense of grandeur and to inspire great faith within the priests and the general population. The harmonic proportion of the structure, its orientation in celestial bodies, and the location of the sacred altar, holies of holies, were all part of the design to create an environment where the spirit of a specific nature would dwell. Every component within a temple, the soaring height of the column, the number of columns, the clerestory, windows, the position of the wall, the painting and the carving on the walls and the columns, all reflected an intense desire to establish a sacred place for a dialogue between the human form and its spiritual essence. The use of columns in temple construction were first recorded in the Nile Valley, where it was not uncommon to find them carved to resemble palm trees, papyrus reeds, or lotus blossoms. These tree plants represented man's physical, mental, and spiritual relationship with the Creator. The fruit of the palm tree provided nourishment, and its leaves and trunk were used to create shelter. The stem of the papyrus plant were used to make paper, thus allowing them to record his thoughts and deeds for posterity. The lotus flower symbolizes the mind and its potential for receiving knowledge and spiritual enlightenment. Every building tells a story in stone and says something about the culture that created it. How its historians interpret an ancient architectural monument is determined by their willingness to discuss their prejudice and by their ability to see the edifice through the eyes of the people who created it. The architecture of Kemet requires such an analysis. Ancient Kemet is a land of many firsts, and chief among them is the distinction of being the home of the world's first skyscraper. The first stone building ever constructed still stands majestically within the vast complex of temples of Saqqara. It is called the Step Pyramid. There is a total of 15 royal pyramids at Saqqara. Most are in varying stages of disrepair, but they were all developed from the same prototype. The Step Pyramid was built around 2630 BCE for a king of the third dynasty named Djoser. His pyramid rises to a height of 197 feet in a series of 6 box-like steps called mastabas, an Arabic word which means mud benches. The early mastabas were small rectangular tombs in which the bodies of nobles were buried during the early dynastic period in Kemet. The step pyramids of Djoser represent a profound shift in the construction of the traditional tomb. In this instance, 6 mastabas were built, one on top of the other. Each of the 5 mastabas was smaller than the one beneath it. This created a tier monument that symbolically represents as stairs to heaven. The completed structure were encased in polished limestone. Thus, the first pyramid was born. The step pyramid is but one of a number of structures comprising the largest stone complex ever built under the rulership of one leader. The uniquely styled architecture of the enclosed wall and the adjoining colonnades gives the impression that you are viewing a contemporary structure, not one that was built more than 4,500 years ago. The architectural designs employed at this site set the architectural standard in Kemet for the next 3,000 years. The enclosure wall at the Saqqara complex was originally nearly 1,800 feet long and 900 feet wide. This wall rose to a height of over 30 feet and enclosed more than a square mile of land. Upon entering the pyramid complex of Djoser, one must walk through a colonnade consisting of 40 columns believed to represent the 40 provinces of state of early Kemet. The design of these columns is quite reminiscent of the architectural style that would be attributed to the Greek more than 2,000 years later. The architect responsible for designing the step pyramid and its surrounding compound was referred to by Manetho in 285 BCE as the inventor of the art of building with hewn stones. This architect's name was Imhotep, and he is described as the world's first multi-genius. Imhotep's brilliance supersedes his architectural ability, for he was also revered as an astronomer, philosopher, poet, and physician. He was recorded in history as the world's first physician, a title that was later bestowed upon a Greek named Hippocrates. hypocrites, Hippocrates, who was born some 2,200 years later. During his lifetime, Imhotep was given many titles, among them Chancellor of the King of Lower Kemet, the first after the King of Upper Kemet. The first after the King of Upper Kemet, High Priest of Heliopolis, and Administrator of the Great Palace, just to name a few. He was deified 2,000 years after his death by the resident of Kemet and was later referred to as Asclepius, the god of medicine by the Greek. As a philosopher, Imhotep is credited with having written many poems and proverbs, the most famous of which is "Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we shall die." Very rarely is a nobleman more popular than the king he serves, but in the case of Imhotep, he was worshipped in early Christianity as the Prince of Peace and described as the first Christ, a title meaning the Anointed One. See? Alright, I have to read this too. 10 miles west of Cairo, at the geographical center of the Earth's landmass, is a man-made limestone plateau, which is 1 mile square and rises 130 feet above the Nile Delta. This area, which today is called Giza, is unmistakably the most important archaeological site on the planet. It is at the Giza Plateau that we find the ancient remains of a vast industrial complex comprising 10 pyramidal structures, the most famous of which is the Great Pyramid. This Great Pyramid is the largest, oldest, and only remaining of the 7 wonders of the world. When it was originally constructed, the Great Pyramid rose to a height of 481 feet in 201 tiers. Unfortunately, the last 12 courses of stones and the capstone were removed at some undisclosed point in time. All that remains today is a 20 by 20 foot platform at its apex and a wood frame which indicates its original height. Since its construction, the Great Pyramid has withstood 2 ruinous assaults at the hands of Arabs who had little or no regard for its historic significance. These attacks were an obvious indication that this structure represented a culture that was foreign to the Arabs, and in their eyes was therefore unworthy of their respect. See it. All right. The first major assault on the Great Pyramid occurred in 820 ACE when a Persian caliph by the name of Abdullah al-Mamun burrowed into its interior in an attempt to find the great treasures rumored to have been stored inside its secret chambers. After tunneling more than 100 feet through the solid core of the pyramid, al-Mamun's men finally broke through into a narrow passageway. The men scurried around in the various rooms and corridors of the pyramid. They were unable to find any treasure and they abandoned their search in disgust. As a result of al-Mamun's forced entry into the pyramid, its interior was made accessible to outsiders for the first time in more than 1,000 years. The second major attack against the pyramid occurred in 1356 ACE when its polished limestone interior was removed and used to rebuild the city of Cairo after a devastating earthquake. Originally, the entire outer surface of the pyramid was covered with polished white limestone, giving the appearance of one smooth and continuous surface reflecting the light of the sun and moon. Over the course of several decades, the entire 22-acre of 100-inch thick limestone casing was removed and used in the construction of the Mosque of Al-Hassan El-Rafai and the fortress of Khalat el-Quebel in Cairo. The stripping of the limestone covering left the pyramid's outer core of masonry exposed. Those same blocks now provide enthusiastic tourists easy access to climb to the pyramid's apex. The Great Pyramid has stirred the imagination of man for countless years. It is mentioned in no less than 10,000 documents and has been the subject of many commentaries and theories as to its construction and purpose. There are many who believe the Great Pyramid was built as a tomb for King Khufu, while others maintain it was used as a water purifier. There are those who say it was built by being from Atlantis or by aliens from outer space. The truth is, there are neither painting nor carving in the pyramid to attest to its purpose, nor has any history of its construction survived the passage of time. One of the greatest misconceptions regarding the Great Pyramid is that it was constructed by Jews during their enslavement in Kemet. Examination of a timeline will show the error of this belief. Abraham, who was the founder of the Judaism and ancestor of both the Arab and Jews, was said to have been born around 1675 BCE, which was at least 900 years after the Great Pyramid is believed to have been constructed. It is not the intent of this work to discuss the controversy and confusion surrounding the building of this structure or its intended use. The purpose here is to present empirical data and examine its logical implications. One must be extremely careful when examining the Great Pyramid and other aspects of ancient Kemet, for they have been misinterpreted by armchair archaeologists who have never been to Egypt, and others who have visited Egypt, brought with them their prejudice and profound disdain for the history of Africa and its people. As researcher and author John Anthony West noted in his book Serpent in the Sky, Egyptian knowledge is a whole. No part of it is meant to be studied divorced from the rest. Since there is no other way for us to study it except piecemeal, we must always bear in mind that any conclusion we come to must be related to the whole from which they have been extracted. Egyptian knowledge is always implicit, never explicit. Egypt did not talk about its knowledge, but rather incorporate it into its art and architecture, allowing it to exercise its effect emotionally. Egypt talked to the mind of the heart. Mr. West's statement regarding Kemet can just as easily be applied to most investigation of traditional African history and culture. It is very difficult for anyone to know that which they do not understand, and when understanding is further hindered by arrogance and prejudice, true knowledge often gives way to distorted perception of reality, which is oftentimes accepted as legitimate scholarship. Many archaeologists are of the opinion that the Great Pyramids was built by pagan primitives to house the body of deceased king. They believe its measurements were made by crude instruments and that a slave labor force of thousands of men were used to quarry, transport, and position the approximately 2.5 million stones that make up this great structure. These beliefs persist despite the lack of evidence to fully support them. The Great Pyramids may not be the largest stone structure ever created, but it is still, many thousands of years after its construction, the most perfectly aligned building to true north. The alignment is only 1/12 of a degree of true north. This alignment has been attributed to the shifting of the Earth's crust into the pyramid's construction and not an error on the part of those who constructed it. The Paris Observatory is the most perfectly aligned structure built in modern times, and it is aligned 6 minutes off true north. How is it possible that slaves or primitive workers accomplished a feat thousands of years ago which skilled technicians would have difficulty duplicating today. This question has been answered, so it is ignored. This question has not been answered, so it is being ignored. The pyramid's precise alignment to true north is a confirmation that its builders possess a working knowledge of geography, which is essential to the development of any nation. From the earliest of times, the inhabitants of the Nile Valley had to continuously survey and re-establish the agricultural boundaries that were washed away with the annual flooding of the Nile. The designation of the national and domestic boundaries, constructions of temples, and the undertakings of trade and commerce all require a working knowledge of geography and geodesy. Today, the basis of geography is the system of latitude and longitude used to measure the size of our planet and to chart its surface with supreme accuracy. Most people think of this as an invention of the modern world because it requires a working knowledge of a higher form of mathematics such as spherical trigonometry. However, we find this exact knowledge incorporated into the interior and exterior measurement of the Great Pyramids. The pyramid's perimeter, the sum of its base length in 3,000 is 3,023 feet, which is precisely equal to 1/2 meter of a degree of latitude at the equator, or 143,200th of the polar circumference of the Earth. A measurement of the pyramid's perimeter, including the outermost socket upon which it rests, which incidentally rests 8 inches below the surface, yields a length of 3,043 by 8 feet, which is 3,043.8 feet, which is precisely equal to 1/2 minute of a degree of longitude at the equator, or 143,200th of the equatorial circumference of the Earth. The entire pyramid rests on a platform which is more than 755 feet in length and level to within 4/5 of an inch. The height of the pyramid plus the height of its base platform, 482.7571 feet, is equal to 143,200 of the polar radius of the Earth, or the distance from the center of the Earth to the North Pole. It should be noted here that the repetition of the formula 1 by 42,200 in the 3 measurement is intentional and related to the size and shape of the Earth. There are 360 degrees in a circle, 60 minutes in a degree, and 2/2 minutes in 1 minute. 2/2 minutes in 1 minute. Simply put, 360 by 60 by 2 equal 43,200. These 3 basic measurements of the pyramids, all on the same scale, represent the 3 essential geodetic value of our planet, with a precision match only with contemporary satellites or space shuttle surveys. These measurements, in addition to other geographic facts about the Great Pyramid, its placement at the center of the Earth's landmass, its position at the apex of the Nile Delta, and its orientation to the cardinal points of the compass, all support the idea that whoever built the Great Pyramid knew the precise circumference of the planet and was aware of the flattening at the pole and equatorial bridge. This knowledge was not rediscovered until the 18th century ACE. The fact that the Great Pyramid was engineered with accuracies measured to the hundredth of an inch is a testimonial to its builders having possessed an advanced knowledge of mathematics. To cite another example, the pyramid's height relates to its perimeter as the radius of a circle does to its circumference. Dividing the perimeter of the pyramid's base by twice its height yield 3.1428, which is a working approximation of pi often used by contemporary engineers in construction design. The area of a face of the Great Pyramid is also the same as the square of its vertical height. The square of the vertical height is also the same as 1/2 the pyramid's base width times its slant height. This fact indicates that the pyramid's design is in accordance with pi 1.618, also called the golden number. PHI 1.618, also called golden number. Math is an integral part of astronomy. The science of observing the stars and planets. Astronomy is vital for the calculation of the length of the year and the precise measurement of the solstice and equinoxes, which lead to the creation of yes, I like going upon me, so we get interrupted. Anyway, let I continue with the reading. See that the mathematics. See, let's continue with the reinforcement of I self-esteem and self-confidence. See it, so yeah, so to continue. Math is an integral part of astronomy, the science of observing the stars and planets. Astronomy is vital for the calculation of the length of the year and the precise movement of the solstice and equinoxes, which leads to the creation of a calendrical system. It is a commonly accepted fact that the Egyptians were responsible for the development of a 365.25 day year, a 24-hour and the second as a unit of measure for the hour. Clues as to how this information was obtained can be found in the interior passages of the Great Pyramid, which were used as astronomical observatories for watching and clocking the heavens. One of the most precisely constructed passages in the pyramid is the descending passage. The passage points to the north skies at an angle of 26 degrees 17 minutes, which, when subtracted from the pyramid's latitude's angle of nearly 30 celestial pole, nearly 30 degrees, provides a view within 3 degrees 43 minutes of the celestial pole, a perfect angle for watching the transit of circumpolar stars across the entrance opening. Another passage, the ascending passage, angle off from the descending passage at 26 degrees 17 minutes and will be the precise angle for the light reflection. If the light from a transiting star shown on a pool of water or a mirror at the juncture point of the descending passage, the light would be reflected up the ascending passage and observed in the Grand Gallery. Today, the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C. calculates the length of the year by timing the light of a transiting star across a limited field of vision as it is reflected from a pool or mercury. Located deep inside the confines of the pyramid is a room referred to as the King's Chamber. It was given the name for purely chauvinistic reason because it is the largest of the two rooms in the pyramid. it had to have been built for the king, and the smaller one was obviously built for the queen. The queen's chamber is made of limestone and the king's chamber is made of granite, which is believed to have been quarried in Aswan, some 600 miles to the south. The dimension of the king's chamber, 34 by 4 in length by 17 by 2, 34.2 in length and 17.2 in width by 19.1 in height, are more significant because they express two ratios of Pythagorean triangles. The pyramid builders were obviously familiar with these sacred triangles thousands of years before Pythagoras was supposed to have introduced themselves. These same basic geometric principles were referred to by Plato as the building blocks of the cosmos. Elmer D. Robinson, a well-renowned mathematician at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland, studied the Great Pyramid in detail and made these remarks. The analysis and mathematical modeling of the Great Pyramid indicate that the ancient Egyptians had a knowledge of geometry and mathematics which few historians and archaeologists will give them credit for. The evidence is strong that they knew of and used quadratic equations and quadratic formulas. They most certainly had a system of logarithms, used combinations of integers with an irrational number, and used an infinite geometrical progression having many unique properties. This is a level of mathematical knowledge equaled only within the past 200 years. Despite the reference to the king's chamber as the site where the body of Khufu was buried, nobody has ever been found there. As a matter of fact, evidence indicates that no original burial has ever been found in any of the approximately 72 pyramids in Egypt. The Great Pyramid, in stark contrast to the hundreds of tombs which have been unearthed in Egypt, contains no paintings, carvings, or images traditionally associated with the burial of royalty. The association of this pyramid with Khufu is also something of a mystery. The only surviving image of the great pharaoh Khufu is a small ivory statuette 4 inches in height. This figurine was found not in Giza but in a Thailand 300 miles to the south of Giza in the Temple of Abydos. Further investigation of the king's chamber continued to shed some light as to some of its possible uses. Inside the chamber there are 2 shafts which were cut through 200 feet of solid masonry to the outer surface of the pyramid. These shafts, which face in a northerly and southerly direction, have long been regarded as air shafts that ventilate the king's chamber. New evidence have been presented which show the so-called air shafts are inclines within 1 degree of accuracy to the north celestial pole and to the 3 star of Orion's belt to the south. It has been suggested that these openings were meant as symbolic guideways for the soul, guiding it either towards the circumpolars in the northern sky or to the constellations of Orion in the southern sky. Lucy Lamy, author of Egyptian Mysteries, offers additional insight on this interesting theory. Egypt, it was said, is in the image of heaven. The emphasis placed on north and south then lead us to investigate the regions of the skies, of which earth is only a reflection. It is actually a matter of 2 ways being offered to each individual, that of final liberation and eternal life, the north, or that of reincarnation in a mortal body and the commencing of a new experience, the south. The main star viewed through the northern shaft is called Alpha Draconis. Around it turn the circumpolars, often called the indestructibles, because they never disappeared below the horizon. It was for this reason that these stars symbolize immortality. A soul which had chosen this path in life was said to ascend into the imperishable dominion of the northern heavens. The southern shaft was oriented to the 36 stars constellation, also referred to as Tekken. These Tekken, whose consecutive helical rising occurred approximately every 10 days. Hence the name Tekken, which is derived from the Latin prefix "de", meaning 10. Each Tekken rose above the horizon after a period of 70 days of invisibility. The 70 days mummification process corresponded to this phenomenon. Among the stars within this southern hemisphere are Osiris, Orion, the symbol of resurrection, and Isis, Sophis, Sirius, which was associated with the annual regeneration of the Nile. The most impressive aspect of the Great Pyramid is its sheer size and volume. It is composed of approximately 2.5 million stones, which weigh an average of 2.5 tons each. There are several located above the King's Chamber that weighs as much as 70 tons, the equivalent of a railroad locomotive. Its base covers an area of 13.11 square acres or 7 city blocks. It is perfectly level to within 1/2 inch. There is more stone in the Great Pyramid than in all the cathedral, churches, and chapels built in England since the time of Christ. In more contemporary terms, the Great Pyramid was built to a height equaling a 45-story building and with enough stones to build 30 Empire State Building. So vast is this structure that if all of its stones were cut into 1-foot blocks and laid end to end, they would stretch 2/3 of the distance around the Earth at the equator. The cement used to bind these stones in place is 1.50 of an inch, the thickness of 2 sheets of paper, and it is nearly invisible when compared to the 1/2 inch of mortar used in traditional brick construction. If you were to give a modern construction engineer the task of building a structure 85 million cubic feet in volume, composed of over 2.5 million blocks of limestones and granite, weighing from 2 to 70 tons apiece, with a joint tolerance of no more than 1/50 of an inch and an orientation of true north, the engineer would probably tell you that what you are asking for is impossible to build by any means known today. There is very little creditable data concerning the construction of the Great Pyramid. The one source commonly referenced is Herodotus, who visited Kemet in 443 BCE and reported that 100,000 men built the Great Pyramid in a period of 20 years. During the 3-month period of the annual flood season, this account seems to be highly improbable, considering the fact that the data suggested translates into only 1,800 working days at 12 hours per day, which equals a total of 21,600 man-hours. If this sum is divided into the 2,300,000 blocks, it means that the builders had to position about 1,200 blocks a day, or 100 blocks an hour, or almost a block every minute. We must remember that the father of history visited the pyramids about 2,000 years after they were constructed, and many primary sources were not available to him as recently as 1978. Were not available to him. Keep doing that. As recently as 1978, the Nippon Corporation of Japan attempted to construct a miniature pyramid at Giza utilizing the method attributed to the original builders. The plan was to quarry the stones using crude implements, transport them by raft down the Nile, drag them from the river's edge, and then lift them into place with simple levers. However, once construction began, the workmen were confronted with innumerable problems. The tools used to quarry the stones proved to be useless and were replaced by modern jackhammers. The raft used to transport the stones sank in the Nile, and steamboats were employed. Finally, trucks were used to transport the stones to the work site after the use of manual labor proved to be fruitless. Once at the work site, the laborers proved to be unsuccessful at lifting and positioning the stones. Power cranes and helicopters were called in to finish the job. Finally, the workers damaged more stone than they used, and those used in the construction of the pyramid were so poorly aligned that it became obvious to the engineers at the Nippon Corporation they had bitten off more than they could chew. Eventually, the Egyptian government intervened and ordered the dismantling of the pyramid because of the unauthorized use of heavy-duty construction equipment. This failed attempt to construct a pyramid once again raised the question as to how the Great Pyramid was built. Not only were the Japanese unable to duplicate the building of this structure using the ancient theorized means of construction, they were not able to build it using the technologically advanced equipments of today. Throughout the ages, numerous individuals have sought to unravel the mystery of the Great Pyramid's construction. Who built it? What was it? When was it built? And how was it constructed? Although the knowledge which produced the Great Pyramid has been shrouded in secrecy for more than 5,000 years, new discoveries are being made which may soon reveal the purpose and method of construction of this seventh wonder of the world, the most ancient of mysteries. When those questions are answered, do not be surprised if all the proponents of the tomb theories are looked upon in the same light as those who once thought the world was flat and that the earth was the center of the universe. See, Kemet has long been regarded as a land of many mysteries, but one of the most enigmatic structures which has baffled mankind throughout the ages is the statue called the Sphinx, carved in situ out of one single mass of stone, which was formerly a part of the physical geography of the Giza Plateau. The Sphinx stared majestically towards the eastern horizon. The Sphinx is the largest and oldest monument ever sculptured from a single rock. It has the head of a person and the body of a reclined lion. As late as the 18th century CA, 1550 BCE, this monument was called Herem Akhet, Heru of the horizon. This name was a direct reference to Heru, the sun nature, child of Asa and Aset, and the Akhet, which means places where the sun rises and sets. Herem Akhet faces the rising sun, and its strategic position at the foot of the Great Pyramid provides a clue to its symbolic meaning. This great statue is 240 feet long and 66 feet high. It has a shoulder span of 38 feet, a head that is almost 14 feet wide, and a 7-foot smile. Herem Akhet presents a perfect blend of art and architecture, mystery and magnificence. It aesthetically integrates the essence of man and animal in such a way that it expresses the divine relationship between the two. This is not your typical anthropomorphic statue. Symbolically, the body of the beast represents the animal nature which exists in man, and the lion exemplifies the royalty and the power of the divine spirit that exists in its lower physical form. The head of a man symbolizes the intelligence of the mind, which must be cultivated in order to elevate the consciousness into a higher spiritual state so that it may become divine. Metamorphically speaking, It is the suspension of the lower animal nature and the refinement of the thought process that leads to the spiritual evolution of man. Spiritually speaking, it is only by conquering the beast within that one is capable of truly knowing God. Knowledge comes from enlightenment, light, God, good, which vanquishes the darkness, ignorance, evil, devil. Heru represents the conquest of good over evil. Set, Satan, and Heramaket exemplifies the eternal conquest of good over evil because he faces the eastern horizon and is physically enlightened by the sun as it rises each morning. The Sphinx has been called the soul of Egypt by Zahi Hawass, the director of the Egyptian Antiquity Organization. But in order to understand the depths of its soul, one must go back to its Kemetic roots. A simple analysis of the names that foreigners have used to describe the statue helps to explain how they misinterpreted its spiritual meaning. In Arabic, the Sphinx is called Abu Hal, which means father of terror. The concept was derived from the Greek word Sphinx, which means the strangler. In Greek mythology, the Sphinx was a winged monster with a lion's body and the head and breast of a woman. This beast was perched upon a rock near Thebes in Greece, not Quebec, and asked a riddle of every passerby. All those who were unable to answer the riddle correctly were strangled by the Sphinx. This mystery is derived from the tragedy Oedipus Rex, which was written by the Greek playwright Sophocles. The riddle asked by the Sphinx was, what has one voice and goes on 4 feet, on 2 feet, and on 3, but the more feet it goes on, the weaker it gets? What has one voice and goes on 4 feet, on 2 feet, and on 3 feet, but the more feet it goes on, the weaker it gets? So like a dog walk too long, him lift up 1 foot and you know. In the myth, Oedipus is traveling to Thebes when he is confronted by the Sphinx, who asks him the riddle. The Oedipus responded, man who crawls on all 4s as a baby, then walks on 2 legs as an adult, and walks with a cane in old age. Having solved the riddle, the Sphinx immediately committed suicide by jumping off a cliff, and Oedipus continued his journey to Thebes, where he was later proclaimed king for having outsmarted the great beast. This myth vividly illustrates how the Greeks borrowed, plagiarized, and distorted elements of Kemetic art, symbolism, and philosophy. Before the statue of Her-Abaket, there were no images of human-headed lion in the world. Since its creation in Kemet, Sphinx have been found among the remains of ancient civilizations such as Assyria, Phoenicia, and those of Asia Minor. As was the case with the other nations, Sphinx began to surface in Greece only after contact was made with the people of Kemet. Interestingly, when the Greeks created a statue similar in design to Her-Abaket, they defined it by making it evil and portraying it as female because of their low regard for a woman. Another interesting element in the concept of the stolen legacy of ancient Kemet is the close proximity of the monstrous Sphinx in the Greek city of Thebes. Thebes was an ancient city in Boeotia, a region in central Greece, which was founded by the Phoenician king named Cadmus. Around 500 BCE, 1500 years earlier, the capital of Kemet was located in a city called Waset, which was regarded as the greatest city in the richest and most powerful nation of the ancient world. The Greek later renamed this city Thebes. The Greek derived the name Thebes from the African word Apet or Epet, which was the original name for the Temple of Karnak in Waset. The Greek then added a feminine prefix to Apet, which became Tapet, from which they derived Thebai, which later became Thebes. Within Waset, there existed two magnificent temples, the Shamayet Ipet Luxor Temple and Ipet Esut Karnak Temple. The two temples were connected by an avenue of 2,000 Sphinx spanning a distance of 2 miles. Homer, the Greek poet, praised the glory of this great city in the Iliad, 750 BCE, and referred to it as the hundred-gated city. Historically data shows that the city Historical data shows that the Greek visited Waset and remained this great city, Thebes, and renamed this great city Thebes. They later built a city in Greece, which they named Thebes and associated a Sphinx with it. The likelihood that the Greeks developed these associations independent of any direct contact with Kemet is totally preposterous. The Temple of Haremaket. A short distance east of the Power of Haremaket stands an ancient temple, which was one of the last major monuments to be discovered in Giza. Although evacuation of the site was not begun until 1920s, it wasn't until 40 years later that the temple was studied in detail, and the results of the study were revealed to the world. Herbert Rick, a Swiss archaeologist, spent 3 years researching the structure and concluded that it was the oldest solar temple ever built in Kemet. An article produced in the April 1986 issue of Smithsonian Magazine reviewed Mr. Rick's finding. He identified niche structures as its east and west side dedicated to the rising and setting sun, a colonnade court with 24 massive pillars marking the 24 hours of the day, and 10 or 12 statues of the pharaoh Khafre. Rick further concluded that the Sphinx was not placed to guard the Giza Necropolis, as some Egyptologists had surmised, but instead was a symbol of the sun god himself peering over the colonnade into the sanctuaries below. This temple is perfectly oriented to the astronomical midpoint of the year, the vernal and autumnal equinox. It is during the spring and fall equinox that the earth experiences 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. This temple is so precisely aligned to the movement of the sun, that anyone standing in the eastern sanctuary at the equinox will see the sun trace the outline of the head of Haremaket while illuminating the sanctuary as it sets behind the shoulder of the great statue. The same scene can be witnessed in the sanctuary of another temple. As the sun sets during the winter solstice, the Smithsonian article also described another fascinating discovery made by Rick. 2 other astonishing alignments were revealed as the study went on, both involving the Egyptian hieroglyphic Akhet, which means places where the sun rises and sets. The Akhet is rendered as a sun between 2 mountains, viewed with the Sphinx at the time of the summer solstice, when the sun is at its greatest distance north of the celestial equator. It sets directly between the pyramids of Khufu and Khafre, thus writing across the horizon and Akhet on the scale of acres. This is a clear reference to Horus, the god, and the Akhet sign, because anyone approaching from ancient Memphis would have seen the head of the Sphinx silhouetted between the two pyramids. Heramaket is separated from the pyramid of Khafre by a distance of more than 1,500 feet, and the Solar Temple, which is located directly in front of Heramaket, was built 70 feet below it. Yet despite these vast distances, the architects, engineers, and designers of this human-headed statue, the Solar Temple and the second pyramid, was able to orient all three structures to the solstice and equinoxes with a skill that is unimaginable. Sorry, long may I try to revert that. With a skill that is unimaginable by today's standards. To many, the buildings at Giza are much more than monuments to the dead. These ancient edifices are signatures of godlike men, written in stone across the sky, and they serve as physical reminder of what man once was and the level of godliness he must aspire to attain. The great Temple of Luxor, 400 miles south of modern-day Cairo, there exists a city once heralded as the seat of government for the most powerful nation in ancient time. This city was called Waset, or Wasset, a word in the ancient Kemetic language which meant the scepter. During the 18th and 19th dynasty, Waset was the center of an educational, spiritual, and architectural renaissance, which continued to have a profound influence upon contemporary life. It has been said that more than 80% of the remains of ancient Kemet can be found in Waset. The tombs on the west bank of the city have yielded some of the greatest treasures in archaeological history, and the temples on the east bank are regarded as some of the most remarkable monuments ever created. So impressive was this great city that foreigners were often awestruck by its magnificence. The Greeks renamed this ancient city Thebes, and at one point even referred to it as the city of Zeus, the home of the great god. The Arabic name for Waset is El-Aqsa, a word which means the palaces, and refers to the great temples the Arabs assume to be palaces built for royalty. Eventually, the name El-Aqsa was westernized to Luxor, which is the current name for the city and the origin of the word luxury. Two of the most magnificent temples in the ancient Waset were the Shamayit Apet, the southern Ipit, which the Arabs called the Temple of Luxor, and the Ipet Isut, which is now called the Temple of Karnak, the Ipet Isut. The Temple of Ipet Isut Karnak was the largest complex ever constructed in ancient Kemet. It is nearly a quarter of a mile in length and consisted of a series of temples built over a period of nearly 2,000 years. At the behest of numerous kings, Ipet Isut is an ancient Kemetic word which means the most select of places, or the holiest of places, an obvious reference to the sacredness of this site. This temple also contains the largest colonnades hall ever constructed. The colonnades hall comprises 136 columns, which stands in 16 rows. The central aisle of the temple contains 12 columns in 2 rows, which are 69 feet in height. The papyrus-shaped capital adorned each of these 12 columns in large enough to The papyrus-shaped capital adorning each of these 12 columns is large enough to accommodate a group of 100 men standing crowded atop it at the same time. This great hall measures 338 feet in width and 170 feet in length, and the area of its floor space is equal to that of the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. The English astronomer Sir Norman Lockyer discovered that the axis of this temple was accurately oriented to the summer solstice, and that the colonnades hall was designed in such a manner as to funnel sunlight between the 2 rows of columns in a manner similar to that of a telescope. After numerous summer visits to Egypt, Lockyer's research revealed that the Sun Temple of Ra at Karnak was so perfectly aligned to the summer solstice that a beam of light coming through a narrow passage, some 500 yards, all the way to a properly oriented sanctuary would remain there so many more than a couple of minutes, then pass away. What's more, it would come in a crescendo and go in a diminuendo, with an observable peak at the precise solstice. It is believed that this phenomenon allowed the astronomer, priests of the temple, to be able to determine the precise length of the year to within a minute, or 4 points of a decimal. The Ipet Asut and the Shemayet Ipet, the southern place, were connected to one another by a grand avenue of 2,000 Sphinx which spanned a distance of 2 miles. These human-headed Sphinx bore the likeness of Imhotep III, and once a year this avenue was lined with thousands of people who witnessed the annual procession of a statue of Ammon as it was carried by the temple priests from the Ipet Esut to the southern Ipet. By contrast, the western entrance to Ipet Esut Karnak Temple was lined with a narrow row of ram-headed Sphinx, and each statue had a small figurine of the king nestled between his paws. These ram-headed edifices represented the nature Amen, who was also referred to as Amun or Aman. This name means hidden and referred to the hidden or unseen presence of God. This word is also used today as the conclusion to many prayers and is a lasting reminder of the powerful influence of ancient Kemetic religion. The southern Ipet is currently referred to as the Temple of Luxor, and it was originally dedicated to the nature Mot. The greater part of this building was constructed during the region of Imhotep III, 1380 BCE, but Ramesses II expanded upon the work of Imhotep III about a century later and added the great courtyard and an impressive outer pylon. Ramesses is more closely associated with this temple today because of the numerous statues bearing his likeness, which now adorn it. Flanking the entrance to this temple are 2 colossal statues of Ramesses and one of an original pair of Tekken. Throughout the centuries, this temple had been the site of a great deal of religious activities. During the time of Imhotep III, images were inscribed upon the wall of this temple depicting the Annunciation, Immaculate Conception, Virgin Birth, and adoration of the Kemetic Trinity of Asa, Aset, and Heru. During the Coptic occupation, 450 ACE, a chapel was erected in the rear of the temple, and the original Kemetic images were covered with plaster and replaced with a mural of Jesus the Christ and the 12 disciples at the Last Supper. In the 12th century ACE, the mosque of Abu el-Hagar was built among the rubble of the Luxor Temple, which was at that time buried under a minimum of 15 feet of sand and debris. This mosque makes far a more unusual sight today because its former entrance is now several yards above the current ground level of the temple, because the mosque rests upon the foundation of this ancient temple. Egyptologists have positioned for its removal so that the temple can be fully restored. Islamic leaders have fought such recommendation, have argued that the mosque has as much right to this sacred site as the temple. And people are now no soul, you know, them people are soulless. You know, see. One of the most thorough and impressive analysis of Luxor Temple was provided by the Alatian philosopher R.A. Schwaller de Lobos, and his wife Asha. Mr. Delovish was a highly respected mathematician, and his wife was an accomplished Egyptologist and writer. Over a course of 15 years, 1937 to 1952, this husband and wife team, aided by their daughter Lucy Lamy, measured, recorded, and drew every inch of the temple, including each stone, wall carving, and statues. Their research was compiled in 3 massive volumes entitled The Temple de l'Homme, the Temple in Man. Their combined research suggested that the temple was dedicated to the creation of man, and that the floor plan of the temple was representative of the anatomical structure of man. Lucy Lamy superimposed the skeletal framework of a statue of Ramesses II over the floor plan of the temple and discovered some interesting similarities. The open courtyard represents the legs, the hypostyle hall represents the thigh, and peristyle court represents the abdomen, and the inner temple represents the head. Within each segment of the temple, activities took place which were related to specific body functions. In the hall that corresponded to the center of perception, there are designs that emphasize time, space, measurement, and orientation. This hall also contains 12 columns, which corresponds to the 12 hours of the day. In the hall that corresponds to the mouth, we find written all the names of the nature and creation of the god to Ta via the spoken word. Under the chin, at the site of the vocal cords, the king is baptized and given his new name. It is also in this hall where we find the scene of the marriage of the mother of the king of the god. Amen. Through a skillful interpretation of the Kemetic Medu nature, hieroglyphics, and symbolism, the Dilubirich family discovered that the architectural form in Kemet embodied a level of knowledge they describe as sacred science. This sacred science was regarded as the grand synthesis of Kemetic art, science, religion, philosophy, and architecture, whose expression were unique with each pharaonic temple that was constructed. See the significance of Tekken. The more than 4,400 years, the Great Pyramid held the distinction of being the tallest structures ever made by man. On December 6, 1884, another Nile Valley-inspired architectural structure was completed, which at 555 feet became the tallest man-made structure on the planet. This edifice was called the Washington Monument, and it was created as a tribute to the first president of the United States of America. But in reality, this monument was nothing more than a replica of an African Tekken. It has been estimated that the Ipet is to contain as much as 64 Tekkens, of which only 2 are currently standing. Of the 2 Tekkenwe, which originally stood at the entrance to the southern Epet, only 1 remains. Its companion was given as a gift to the King Louis Philippe of France in 1836 by Muhammad Ali of Turkey, in exchange for a clock which never worked. Sure. This relocated Tekken will now stand at the southern end of the Champs-Élysées in the Place de la Concorde, Square of Peace in Paris, France. During the reign of Thutmose III, circa 1550 BCE, 2 Tekkenwe was erected at the entrance of the Temple of Heliopolis. They were moved to Alexandria around 10 BCE by the Romans, and in the 1870s they were given as gift to the United States and Great Britain. One now stands in Central Park in New York City, and the other was erected along the Thames River in London. Currently there are 13 Tekken in Rome, including one which stands in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. Tekken may also be found in Turkey, Germany, and many other locations throughout the world. The European fascination with Tekken dates back to the times when the Greeks first visited Kemet. They referred to these monuments as obliques. as obelisks. Dr. Labid Habiachi discusses this topic in greater detail in his publication, The Obliques of Egypt, Skyscrapers of the Past. Now, them guys can't make them own. Obliques were known to the ancient Egyptians as Tekken, a word whose derivation is unknown. When the Greeks became interested in Egypt, both obliques and pyramids attracted their attention. To the former, they gave the name obliques, from which the modern name is almost all language. In all language is derived. Obeliskos is a Greek diminutive meaning small spit. It was applied to obelisk because of their tall, narrow shape. In Arabic, the term is mesala, which means a large patching needle, and again has reference to the object's form. The symbolic significance of the Tekken has undergone interpretation over the ages. Originally, this structure was associated with Osiris, as referenced in Volume 2 of The Gods of the Egyptian by A.E. Wallace Budges. Isis was never able to recover the privy member of Osiris, which, having been thrown into the Nile immediately upon its separation from the rest of the body, in order, however, to make some amends for the loss, Isis consecrated the phallus made in imitation of it and instituted a solemn festival to its memory. From the earliest of times, the Tekken represents the regenerative power of Asa and his resurrection again after death. In later years, Tekken was associated with the bedbend stones and the Bennu bird. The Bennu bird was said to be self-regenerating, and like its namesake, the phoenix, it would live for 500 years, consume itself in a ball of flames, and later arise from the ashes to live for another 500 years. It was also believed that the Tekken was meant to resemble the rays of the sun. Oftentimes, the pyramidion capstones of the Tekken were covered with gold or silver or some combination of the two metals in order to reflect the light of the sun. The date that Tekken were first erected is not known, but it is believed that the kings of the 5th dynasty, 2494 to 2343 BCE, who were fervent worshippers of the sun nature, may have been the first king to erect these monuments. Two Tekken often flanked the entrances to temples, and their presence was representative of the complementary male and female aspects of the nature. The Tekken was a massive monument which was carved from a single block of stone. Most were made from highly polished granite and inscribed with Medu nature, which recorded the accomplishment of the ruler who was responsible for their construction. These structures were also used as time-keeping devices, and the length of their shadow was measured to determine the time of day. These early sundials also played a key role in ascertaining the precise moment of the solstice and the equinox. No record have survived which explain how Tekkenus were quarried, moved, or erected. The tallest Tekkenu currently standing in Egypt can be found in the Temple of Ipet-Isut. It was erected during the reign of Hatshepsut, 1473 to 1458 BCE. Is 97 feet high and weighs an estimated 320 tons. See? Yes, I. So, we are going to stop that this side, and then we will continue later on with, I want to name the survey of the Nile Valley. You see, historical accomplishments of Kemet. Yeah, we're going to start back at the survey of the Nile Valley. You know, see, so we're going to stop that right there, so. And we give thanks once again for all our watch it to this point. You know, see, but these are records that should be, you know, put up there. So give thanks. See, Rastafari.